There are friendships the world watches from the outside, and then there are the ones that happen in the spaces no camera ever reaches. The friendship between Elton John and Princess Diana was both. For decades, people saw the laughter, the charity galas, the glittering appearances. But what they didn't see was the private cost of that bond, the honesty, the arguments, the silences that grew too heavy to carry, and a single phone call that never came in time. Now, years after losing her, Elton has finally begun to speak with the kind of openness that only grief, age, and wisdom allow. And what he's confessing is more human, more painful, and more beautiful than most people ever imagined. It was 1981. Britain was preparing for a royal wedding, and the world was falling in love with the idea of Diana Spencer. She was 20 years old, working with young children, and about to walk into a life that would swallow her whole. Elton John was already a legend by then. He had sold out stadiums, worn costumes that defied gravity, and performed for royalty and rock stars alike. But inside all of that spectacle, he was a man who felt profoundly out of place in formal company. The night they were formally introduced changed that. According to Elton's autobiography, Me, published in 2019, the setting was a royal gathering where both found themselves seated near each other almost by accident. What struck him immediately was not her beauty or her title. It was the way she made him feel seen. She had a natural ease, he wrote, that made even the most intimidated guest feel like they belonged. For Elton, who spent much of his life constructing armor out of sequins and showmanship, that quality was rare and disarming. Within minutes, they were talking the way old friends do, trading observations, sharing quiet jokes at the expense of the stiffness around them. He later said that he felt, in some deep way, that they had been waiting to meet each other, not romantically, not aspirationally, but as two people who carried the same particular loneliness. What made their friendship so durable through the 1980s and early 1990s was something neither of them could have manufactured. They both understood what it meant to be trapped inside a public image that bore very little resemblance to who they actually were. Diana was imprisoned by the weight of the royal institution, its expectations of silence, its demand for perfect composure, its complete indifference to her inner life. She was surrounded by advisors and protocol in a marriage that had quietly become a facade. She smiled in front of cameras and wept in private. She was adored by millions and understood by almost no one. Elton was navigating his own version of the same cage. His flamboyance was both armor and prison. His addictions, which he has spoken about extensively in his autobiography and in public interviews, were consuming him quietly while the world cheered at his concerts. He was scrutinized for his sexuality at a time when the world was not kind about it. They recognized that pain in each other without needing to explain it. That recognition became the foundation of something unusually honest. He has recalled in interviews that Diana would telephone him at unexpected hours, not for any particular reason, but simply to talk. She was wickedly funny. He said, quick-witted in a way that could catch you off guard, and she had a gossip's gift for detail. She remembered everything about everyone. But underneath the humor was a woman who was genuinely frightened, who felt increasingly isolated inside the institution she had married into, and who found it almost impossible to trust anyone whose loyalty wasn't entirely her own. Elton was one of the few people she trusted, and he trusted her equally. Their friendship deepened publicly during the AIDS crisis of the late 1980s and early 1990s, a period when the stigma surrounding the disease was catastrophic. At a time when public figures were either silent on the subject or actively hostile, Diana and Elton both stepped forward, at personal cost to their respective images. Elton had lost close friends to AIDS. He had watched the disease tear through the creative communities he loved. He was already channeling money and attention toward research and care through what would later become the Elton John AIDS Foundation, established in 1992. Diana's contribution to changing public perception around AIDS has been well documented. Her decision to visit HIV-positive patients in hospital settings, to sit with them, hold their hands, and treat them with visible warmth and dignity at a moment when many people refused to be photographed near anyone with the virus, that was not a calculated PR move. It was a moral act, and Elton said it changed the conversation permanently. He has described watching her do it and feeling a particular kind of awe. She wasn't performing compassion. She was simply incapable of treating a suffering human being as anything other than a person who deserved comfort. He said that in those moments, he understood exactly why so many millions of people loved her, because she gave her love genuinely, without calculation, without distance. By the mid-1990s, the friendship had matured into something that looked from the outside almost like a sibling relationship. They argued. They teased each other. They held each other accountable in ways that only people who genuinely care can, which is why the falling out hurt so much when it came. The details, as Elton has explained across multiple interviews over the years, center on a charity photography book he was involved in during 1996. He had asked Diana to contribute a written foreword. She agreed. For Elton, this was deeply meaningful. Her name attached to an AIDS-related project was a statement of solidarity that carried enormous weight. And then, without a personal conversation, she withdrew. A formal letter arrived. Palace advisors, as Elton later understood it, had objected to her association with a publication that contained certain imagery they considered inappropriate for a senior royal. Diana was in an impossible position. She was in the process of losing her royal title following the finalization of her divorce from Prince Charles in August 1996. She was being squeezed from every direction. But Elton didn't fully understand that context in the moment. He felt the withdrawal as a personal abandonment. He responded with hurt rather than patience. She responded to his hurt with a letter that was, by his own description, sharp and cold. And then the phones went quiet. For nearly a year, they did not speak. In later interviews, Elton has been unsparing about his own responsibility in that silence. He has said plainly that he could have called her. He knew her number. He knew, somewhere beneath his wounded pride, that she was going through one of the most painful and disorienting periods of her entire life. He chose not to call anyway. We were both too proud, he told interviewers, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. The reconciliation, when it finally came, arrived in grief. On July 15, 1997, fashion designer Gianni Versace was shot and killed outside his Miami home. The murder sent shockwaves through the global arts community. Both Elton and Diana had been close to Versace. He was one of those rare figures whose warmth and talent had drawn people from every world into genuine friendship. At Versace's memorial service in Milan, Diana and Elton found themselves in the same room for the first time since the silence had begun. They had not planned it. There was no mediated reconciliation, no formal conversation arranged in advance. She simply walked over to where he was sitting, took his hand, and told him she was sorry, that the argument had been silly, that she wanted them to be friends again. Elton has described the moment as one of the most touching of his life. What moved him wasn't just the apology, it was the characteristic Diana quality embedded in it. Even at a funeral, even in the middle of genuine grief, she somehow managed to break the tension with a flash of her irreverent humor that made him laugh despite everything. They made plans to spend time together. They were going to see each other properly, sit down, catch up on everything they had missed during the year of silence. The relief of the reconciliation was enormous. 6 weeks later, she was dead. In the early hours of August 31st, 1997, Elton was woken at his home by a communication informing him that Princess Diana had been killed in a car crash in Paris. She was 36 years old. He has said that he could not process it at first. The cruelty of the timing, the reconciliation so recent, the plans they had made so fresh, made it feel not merely tragic, but specifically, personally unbearable. He had been given her back only to lose her again within weeks. The Spencer family asked him to perform at her funeral at Westminster Abbey on September 6, 1997. Working with his longtime lyrical collaborator Bernie Taupin, Elton reworked the lyrics of Candle in the Wind, a song he had originally written in 1973 as a tribute to Marilyn Monroe to honor Diana. The song was performed once at the funeral and then recorded. It became, according to certified sales records, one of the best-selling singles in recording history. Elton has consistently, over the decades since, refused to frame that as a success. He has said he has never listened to it since. He has said that he could not feel pride about a song that exists only because she is gone. It is not a triumph. It is a wound that happens to have a melody. He donated all royalties to the Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fund. In the years since Diana's death, Elton John has spoken about her with increasing openness, not to mythologize her, but to keep her real. He wants the world to remember not the icon in the tiara, but the woman who called him at odd hours to gossip, who rolled her eyes at aristocratic pomposity, who sat beside AIDS patients and held their hands without flinching. He has remained close to her sons, Prince William and Prince Harry. When Harry faced intense media pressure in the years following his decision to step back from royal duties, Elton spoke publicly in his defense, explicitly invoking Diana's memory and the way press intrusion contributed to her death. The guilt about the year of silence remains. He has said so, clearly and without deflection. He is a man who spent much of his life running from difficult emotions, and the one time that instinct cost him the most was the year he chose pride over a phone call. What he confesses now, broken down to its simplest form, is this: he knew she was struggling, he loved her, and he waited. He waited because he was proud and hurt, and the world is smaller and colder for it. But he also confesses something else, something quieter and perhaps more lasting, that the friendship itself, in all its honesty and warmth and occasional fury, was one of the truest things in his life. That she saw him, really saw him, at a time when very few people could see past the spectacle, and that he saw her the same way. Two people famous beyond comprehension, finding in each other something ordinary and irreplaceable, the simple fact of being known. As he has said, in his own words, she proved that you could be kind in a world that rewards cruelty. That's what I miss most. Not the princess, the person.